I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the projects that we run in the Woodland area of the southwest of England. But first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Plantlife and what we do. So Plantlife are a British conservation charity working nationally and internationally to save threatened wildflowers, plants and fungi. Our conservation staff work with landowners, businesses, conservation organisations, community groups and governments to save our rarest flora and ensure familiar flowers also and plants continue to thrive. You'll notice here this is a screenshot from our website and it's grouped by habitat type, and that's because even though we save species, species grow within habitats, and that's how we focus our conservation work efforts on the ground. I'm going to be talking about a project called Building Resilience in Southwest England, which is actually an innovative project which focuses on an internationally important habitat called temperate rainforests. If you look at that global map, you can see that England and Scotland and indeed Wales hold a lot of the global resource for this habitat type. And unfortunately, as with most habitats, it is facing various threats: habitat fragmentation, change in management, invasive species, ash dieback, and climate change all affect this incredibly important resource that we have in our country. It also hosts a globally significant diversity of lichens and bryophytes. Lichens and bryophytes in themselves are very important because they provide a substantial habitat and food source. They have a role in nutrient and water cycling and are important environmental indicators. So the aims of the Building Resilient project are to conserve the regions of Atlantic woodland and its important lichen and bryophyte communities through emergency conservation management. If you look at this map, you can see that actually there's some on-the-ground conservation management happening up in Exmoor and Dartmoor. They're the little orange stars there. And they're project partners that are working on the ground to bring the management of that land back up to ideal condition. We're also going to equip a range of organisations and communities in the region with new skills to better interpret, identify, record and conserve the important lower plant heritage of the area. You'll notice on this map also that the green regions are what we class as important plant areas. And these important plant areas are available on the Living Atlas platform of ArcGIS and are available for everybody to view and use. It is an exercise that Plantlife carried out over the past years to identify the best places in the UK for threatened species and habitats, and so forms an interesting network with which we can focus attention. So if you're interested in that, please get in contact with Plantlife or me after the presentation, and I can talk you through that. Our project partners here, you'll also notice, are from the AONB and the national parks, and we could not carry out the work that's being done as part of this project without them. So it's all very well saying we're going to conserve the woodland type that we've just mentioned. However, how do we know where that woodland is, and how do we start to focus attention on the ground for people who might want to go out and survey their local woodlands? There is no one source of woodland spatial data available for this habitat type. And so the beginning of the project started with doing a desk-based exercise where we collated woodland parcels which we thought might be appropriate to this task from various different sources. So you'll see on this slide, we collated woodland areas from SSSIs, county wildlife sites, other sites of wildlife interest, etc., etc. And they all had a woodland component. Now, we don't think that all of these woodlands are the right habitat type, but it gives us a starting place with which we can refine to actually identify key areas of interest. So how do we start this refinement process? And sorry, I should say that we collated this using GIS desktop tools. One way is to actually map the data that we already have from this region. And so we have an indicator species list of lichen and bryophyte species that are indicative of the right habitat type, so that temperate rainforest type. Of course, the data is only as good as the information that's available to us, but it's a good place to start. And so we mapped lichen and bryophyte species against the woodland parcels that we had pulled together. And we did a simple comparison query using ArcGIS Desktop to see which woodland parcels held an indicator species. This brought us on to the next stage, which we call the traffic light modelling part of this project. What this means, and it's relatively hard to see on here because of the woodland parcels, but what this shows is that the woodlands with indicator species present within the parcels are coloured green. The woodlands which possibly had an interesting species in, maybe it was towards the border of the woodland, are coloured yellow. It's difficult to pick those out, but there are some there. And the woodlands with no indicator species are considered red. And that's a lot of the resource here. But actually, that's a question of whether that is indicative of whether data has actually been recorded in those areas, as opposed to those areas are not suitable. And so that's always one of the challenges with using data. And also, part of this project identified that there was a huge amount of species data for those lichen and bryophyte lists that hadn't been mobilised. And so part of this project is to actually look at grey literature, so reports that have surveyed areas but hasn't been mobilised for use as of yet. So this is a close-up of the woodland area, and this is the Bovey Valley area in Dartmoor, and it's an interesting one because it shows that important plant area core, that's the blue line there, and it actually proves that we got that core pretty right, because it's green and therefore it hosts indicator species, and so we do think it's the right habitat type. However, it's very interesting to see that very close to that core, you've got conjoining woodlands that are coloured red and yellow. And this is how we start to focus survey attention, because is that really indicative of whether that woodland is appropriate, or is it indicative that nobody has surveyed that woodland for those species before? And I would say it's probably the latter. So we asked communities to actually take part in a rapid woodland assessment survey. And so they could go onto the website, download a form, and go out to their local woodland and identify the condition of that woodland based on variables that were mentioned on the form. So whether it had an open canopy, whether it was inundated with scrub, etc., etc., and whether indeed it had lichen and bryophyte species present. This was a very successful aspect of the project because it started to get people in that area really enthused about taking part in the project. And one of the tools that ArcGIS offers is a tool called story maps, which are incredibly useful when you've got a volunteer scheme running. So this story map shows everybody that went out to collect a rapid woodland assessment survey set of data. They came back to their desk, their computer, and they effectively entered that data onto an online form, and we use that information to populate this map. And if this isn't live, unfortunately, but if you were to scroll over any of those points, you can start to pick out some of the beautiful pictures that were taken and some of the scores that were assigned to show how rich that woodland. And so all of this data is building up our knowledge base of new information to actually assess the health of the woodland that's out there. This is just a focused view of one of the points in Yarnell Wood. and you've got information about the composition structure, habitat features, indicator species, etc., etc. This is an incredibly useful tool because it's almost instantaneous. It's not completely automated, but we can actually pull out the information from an online recording scheme very easily and actually populate a story map quite quickly. And that means that volunteers can see the effort immediately that's been put in. They can feel part of the community, and also that data is digital and made available to share to actually increase our knowledge base. So it's a very valuable tool. It's also a very valuable tool for funders because you can actually take snapshots at increments throughout the process, so throughout the survey period, to see how those numbers increase and how take-up of the project is actually being successful. So to sum up, the spatial analysis as part of this project was integral to the design and delivery of the Building Resilience project. It's actually a scalable methodology for similar habitat types, which has already been implemented in another Plantlife project called the Lost Project, looking out for the small things, which was based in Cumbria in the Lake District National Park. And also we will roll it out to inform new projects in southwest Scotland, which has a similar habitat type. It's a model that works, and it's a way of quickly collating information that's available and unavailable with a view to focusing attention on a specific habitat type. So the project hasn't actually ended, it's got another year to run. And the next stage is to actually take all of the information that's been generated through that survey work and to remap that traffic light layer to reflect the knowledge change over time, which will be actually very interesting to see, and again very impactful as well. And that data will be shared with all of our partners and whoever wants it. We want people to know what's been discovered so that they can better implement woodland management in the right areas on the ground. And story maps are a useful engagement tool for project participants. And so my final slide then is a quote from the Building Resilience Project Manager. And I thought it was an excellent quote, so I thought I'd steal it. And it says, "I feel that the maps have such a lot of potential. They help people to visualize the landscape and bring species records and climate data to life. They are a form of interpretation. We found them to be motivating to volunteers and enable us to track progress. So many uses, but the human reaction is very interesting." I want to thank the Esri team for the support that they've given us throughout using GIS at Plantlife. We really couldn't do as much project planning as we have done up to now. And we are also looking at using Survey 123 and Collector to collect more data in the field in the next survey season.